This is Harsh Rules, I'm Ben Harsh, and today we're going to learn to play Holland 44. Holland 44 was released in 2017 by GMT Games and designed by Mark Simonich. This game supports up to 2 players and takes from 4 to 15 hours to play. Before we begin this episode, I'd like to recognize the Harsh Rules Patreon supporters that help make content like this possible. If you'd like to support the channel, head over to patreon.com/harshrules to learn more. And once again, thank you for your support. Another way you can support the channel is by liking and subscribing. Liking a video helps me understand what content is successful with this audience. As for subscribing, new content appears on this channel first. While you may have found your way here from Board Game Geek or other sites, in the future, I'll also be adding more exclusive content that may only be found here. The best way to be informed when I upload new videos is to subscribe and click the bell icon for notifications. Once again, thanks for watching, and now let's get to the video. On September 17, 1944, Allied forces launched the largest airborne offensive of the Second World War, Operation Market Garden. Conceived by British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, this ambitious strategy came in 2 parts: Market and Garden. Garden, the operation's ground invasion force of armor and mechanized infantry, would fight their way up the Netherlands Highway 69 to Arnhem. This would allow the Allies to create an invasion route through the Netherlands to northern Germany. However, the success of Garden relied heavily on access to paved highways due to the region's marshlands and floodplains called polders. Secure bridges were also a necessity to cross the region's numerous waterways and rivers. And this is where the Market end of the operation came into play. Market deployed American, British, and Polish paratroopers behind enemy lines to capture these key bridges. Therefore, if the members of Market and Garden performed their roles perfectly, the war could be over by Christmas. Unfortunately for the Allies, things would not go according to plan. Operation Market Garden's failure can be attributed to several logistical breakdowns in both the Market and Garden portions of the mission. For example, although Market was the largest airborne assault in history, it lacked sufficient aircraft to enable a unified drop and fully take advantage of surprise. Instead, it would take the Allies 3 days to deploy parachute and glider forces to the battlefield. Upon landing, airborne troops' focus was split between 2 objectives: protect the drop zones to maintain a flow of troops to the battlefield, and capture their bridges. Complicating matters, some drop zones were too far from their targets. For example, intelligence reports regarding strong German anti-aircraft defense around Arnhem meant that 10,000 British airborne were dropped up to 8 miles from their target bridge. As a result, only 800 would make it to the bridge. The rest were pinned down by the Germans several miles away. Garden also had its own share of logistical challenges. Restricted to Highway 69, which would soon become known as Hell's Highway, ground forces were funneled into narrow columns. The Germans blew up British tanks to create traffic jams. This required the Allies to clear the wreckage from the road so they could proceed. All this work slowed Garden's advancement to a crawl. And, despite the Allies' best efforts, the Germans still managed to blow several bridges. Delays and setbacks meant that the mission soon fell behind schedule. This would give German forces ample time to recover, coordinate, and fight back, and ultimately block the Allies from their victory. Holland 44 allows 2 players to reenact Operation Market Garden through a hex and counter war game. One player assumes the role of the Allies, and the other player the German army. This game recreates the logistical risks of the operation, from scattered airborne drops to blown bridges. There are also several opportunities to explore contingency plans for historical setbacks as well as unexpected new operational challenges. So, if all of this sounds interesting, then stick around, because we're going to learn how to play Holland 44. To set up Holland 44, you will need 2 pages to reference, the setup card and page 26 of the rulebook. Holland 44 has 2 scenarios, the 11-turn short game and the 20-turn campaign game. Setup for both campaigns are the same, so let's get started. Let's begin with the setup card. This card tells you every counter that you need to place to begin the game. Beneath each counter is a number. This number corresponds to the game's map. Holland 44's map is organized into rows of numbered hexes. Each row represents a series of numbers in the hundreds range, starting with 1000. The next row up is 1100, then 1200, and so on. Place the counters I've highlighted on the screen first. Then we will discuss the setup requirements for the next group of counters. A quick note, starting counters on this card all have either white text or a white box in their upper right-hand corner. Although the information shown is different based on the type of unit, if your counters are all loose, this is a quick way to sort out the starting units. Next, the third row of the setup card has a group of German counters that need to be placed in the 406 holding box. This box is located midway down the map on the right side. The German player uses this box to manage the 406th Division. Historically, the Allies' 82nd Airborne leadership was very concerned about how many German troops would attack them and how fast from the German border. This element of the war is simulated using the counters in this box. At the start of each German movement phase, beginning in turn 1, the German player rolls a die for each unit. If the die roll is 1 or 2, that unit arrives that turn. If the die result is 3 through 6, the unit remains in the holding box. The German player will continue this until turn 4, or all units have arrived. On turn 4, the remaining counters in the box are released. The end of the third row on the setup card calls for 20 counters with a question mark on them. These are called unknown units. Unknown units represent the possible presence of one-step German units. These counters start on their unrevealed side, the one with a question mark, and are only flipped over, in other words revealed, when an Allied unit enters their hex or attacks their hex. If the revealed counter shows a 000 garrison unit, it has no effect and is immediately removed. If the revealed unit has a defense strength, it remains in the hex and defends against the Allied units that try to enter. We'll talk more about unknown units in a subsequent episode. For now, to set up these units, first place them face down with the question mark showing, and move the counters around to randomize them. Then place one each at the position shown on the setup card. To speed up setup of unknown units, be aware that each hex on the map that requires one has a yellow dot where they should be placed. The bottom of the setup card has counters to set up breakdown units and remnant units. Units in the game may have up to 3 steps. Each unit's step is represented by the size of a counter. Since there are 2 sides to a counter, when a unit with 3 steps is reduced, they need a second counter to represent that unit's last step of health. This counter is known as a remnant. However, players may create a new unit by reducing a larger unit by 1 step. This is known as a breakdown unit. Allied remnant and breakdown units are stored at the top of the game map. Axis breakdown units are also stored here. And German remnant counters are located at the bottom of the map. I'm guessing the map designer ran out of space. To finish setting up the map, let's switch to the scenario section on page 26 of the rulebook and look at markers. We will begin with traffic markers. As stated earlier, traffic markers can be placed by the German player to slow down Allied units. Traffic markers 1 through 3 start in the traffic marker holding box. Place the other 3 on the turn record track, 1 marker each in turns 2, 3, and 4. Next, let's place the air unit markers and moved markers. The Allied player has 2 air units that can support them in battle. However, their availability is based on the weather. With clear weather, the Allies receive both units. Cloudy weather, 1 unit. No units are available though if the weather is overcast or it's a night turn. Place these units in their holding box. Both units are available on turn 1. Moved markers are used to move artillery units. Historically, the British were at the far end of their supply line back to Normandy and suffered ammunition shortages during this campaign. The game represents this by limiting the Allied player to 3 move markers. Place all 5 move markers in their holding boxes on the map. After that, let's set up the airborne replacement markers. All 4 of these markers start on the 0 space of the airborne replacement track. These markers track airborne replacements generated from the outcome of air landings. For example, scattered airdrops, where troops reconnect with their units later in the mission. A point on this table allows a player to spend it for a replacement. A replacement can restore a reduced unit 1 step, or bring a unit out of the eliminated units box at its lowest step. Next, we need to set up the bridges that begin the game blown. There are 4 blown bridges at the bottom of the map. A blown bridge will affect transit between 2 hexes. Place the blown bridge marker across hexes to represent this. The garden portion of the operation will then only have access to the main part of the map by way of Joe's Bridge, just off the middle of the canal. And finally, let's set up the various status markers. Place the game turn marker on space 1 of the turn record track. Set the weather AM marker and weather PM marker on the clear space of the weather track. Then place the phase marker on the weather space of the sequence of play track. Other markers may be added as the game develops, but you now have enough set up to get started playing. Holland 44 has 2 scenarios based on length, an 11-turn short game and the full 20-turn campaign game. Setup is the same for both. The difference is in the number of turns and the victory conditions. In the short game, the Allies must have at least 4 steps of non-airborne units on the north side of the Wall River during the victory check phase of turn 11. These units must be able to trace a supply path to the west map edge supply source, otherwise it is a German victory. In the campaign scenario, victory is determined by victory points and territory control north of the Lower Rhine. The Allies earn 1 victory point for each city hex they control, as well as 2 special town hexes. They also receive a victory point for each non-airborne, non-breakdown Allied unit that is north of the Lower Rhine and can trace a supply path to a supply source. The Allies claim victory with 10 victory points and at least 1 non-airborne, non-breakdown unit north of the Lower Rhine. The German player is awarded 1 victory point for each Allied 3-step unit eliminated. An Allied 3-step unit is considered eliminated if the remnant is eliminated. All other Allied units count as half a victory point. There is an exception though. The German player is not awarded VPs for breakdown units or airborne supply heads. The German player wins the game if during any victory check phase the Allied player has not yet achieved his victory conditions, and he accomplishes 1 or more of the following objectives. Eliminate or force the removal of all Allied units from the north side of the Lower Rhine, and/or accumulate 12 victory points. Now that we've covered a brief overview of the operation and set up the game, we're in a good place to break for the next episode. Be sure you're subscribed because in the next episode, we're going to look at the game's sequence of play. If you found this video helpful, please give me a like and share with your friends. To be the first notified when the next episode of Harsh Rules becomes available, please hit the bell icon for notifications. And as always, this has been Harsh for Harsh Rules. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.